But right now, if you think about in a high level, building an agent feels like building an IKEA furniture with like random screws missing, right? Hello, and welcome to Generation AI, where we demystify artificial intelligence in the world of higher education. I'm your host, Ardis, Kadiu, and joined with me today is my sidekick and co-host, JC Bonilla. Hey, JC.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast. It's been a week. 7 days. Do you all miss us? What's happening here, Ardis?
Hey, man, I don't know what you're talking about, but our last episode got really good virality on social. So it was all about vibe coding, and it's been very, very popular. It's probably one of my largest posts, and it's very timely as well.
It's the vibe. Is the vibe.
That's right. It's the vibe. So today, imagine we're going to talk about an interesting topic, which is model context protocol. The spec that could make AI feel as a plug and play, just like a USB component. So we're going to talk about why that matters. And we're going to go deep into how agents are essentially useless if they can't reach your data today. Sounds good?
100%. A really, really important topic. And as we do the flow, keep this in mind, right? The reason why we're bringing it in front of you is that there is a battle, right? An engineering battle, how we connect all these tools and the data to the models, and the models for it to do the magic require the data and this standardization. So today's conversation is about an approach to standardization and how potentially it accelerates an already S-curve, very aggressive timeline on all things AI. So looking forward, and let's start chatting all things MCP.
So maybe you have heard of MCP in the many blog posts or X, or if you follow any AI conversations, you probably have heard of the word MCP. There's a lot of companies that are introducing MCP servers, model context protocol. But when you think about it, one of the reasons why we're talking about this is because it's so important as a standardization for our AI agents to reach out and to bring in context around their data. One of the things that we've talked about agents, there's this three-legged stool or three-part on how they operate. There is the brain, or the intelligence, is the reasoning engine, and those are the LLMs and the models. There is the context or the memory, so to speak, and that's where they adopt and they understand the context that they're in, and that's where the data is super important. So the ability for these models to bring in additional data is super important. And then the last part is the act. And act is where these agents become really powerful because they now can perform actions on different systems, on their environment, and so on and so forth. This is where having standards of how do you introduce skills and actions, and how do you give tools to agents in order to operate becomes really, really important. And rather than everybody building their own capabilities or their own tools, we now have a way for these agents to bring in context, meaning additional data from different data sources, as well as have tools that they can register and they can use. So that's where MCP is super important. MCP provides the standard for how does an agent communicate and discover different data sources and capabilities, and how do we plug in tools to them, and how do we give them tools so they can actually do work and reason about what tools to use and what data to bring in. So that's where MCP becomes really, really important. I mean, one of the questions that you probably are asking is like, where does that fit in? Like, where does that come in today?
It's one more acronym. I'm trying to keep up with all these things. Where does it fit in? Of course, right?
Exactly. So think of MCP as this universal adapter, right? On one side, like we said, we got the model, Claude, Gemini, whatever. And on the other side, you've got a lot of different data sources. You've got CRMs, calendars, code repositories, gradebooks, whatever it is. Now, MCP sits in the middle, like that USB-C that we've been talking about. It tells the AI, where are the tools available? And here's how to call them. And here's the data they spit back at you. Think about this as an API, right? But rather than building individual connectors to all these different things, there's a standard that's being created in order to do that. So no custom plugin per tool and no Frankenstein middleware, so to speak, right? We really like this word Frankenstein. We kind of honed in on. Just one handshake, one spec.
Look, just looking around where I'm at, a laptop, so many ways to connect to a laptop, right? But in the way they're standardized, as a MagSafe, is it those type of plugins, right? USB, the connectors that go into it, even things like the internet, Ardis. TCP/IP is a protocol that allows the communication between the standardization, right, of how the data is done, so that point-to-point communication could take place. So it marks also a progression in the maturity of the field of AI, because the standardization accelerates the adoption. And as you mentioned, Frankensteins are just basically a really complicated, very expensive thing to build and to upkeep. One more thing I'd like to remind everybody, Ardis, the way I understood it when it was presented, right? It's a really MVP, right? It was a really a simplified way for this standardization to come and grow, and that's actually probably its success, because there has been other attempts. We saw the Llama stack, OpenAI API is probably the incumbent here in a way, so it's doing well in its simplicity. Perhaps MVP type of thing is what is allowing it to get some traction.
Yeah, just some quick bullets here, right? So you said it's not an API, JC. This is just a protocol. It just says, hey, here is how this protocol works, and then different providers of tools, of chatbots, of AI capabilities, they implement that. So MCP just describes the format and the flow, and not necessarily the business logic. Discovery first, which means that the AI asks, like, there's this notion now, it's like, what can you do? And then the MCP server or the MCP providers that they implement MCP, they say, here's all the things I can do. And it's JSON all the way. So it uses JSON. So tools and data come back in kind of this really nice models in JSON format. And then the other nice thing is that it works locally or remotely, right? So it can work locally with your data sources, or it can work over HTTP. It doesn't matter. The handshake is kind of identical, and your chatbot basically just has one place to say, what can you do? Where you're seeing this right now is probably in Claude, and they have introduced this. The Claude desktop has introduced the ability for you to add MCP servers locally, and a lot of folks actually have done that. So they connect with different data sources and they bring in additional tools.
By the way, Ardis, we should talk about this. This protocol emerges from Anthropic, the lab responsible for Claude. And it's really, really important to remind everybody that this lab is probably the lab that is the more ahead when all things coding or developing AI for coding and for kind of AI engineering. So I think it's a really important milestone for them to come and say, not only we own this space, but as it relates to the universal approach in the standardization of it, aka the seamless integration, here's our POV, and it seems to be win. Right? So an important distinction of where it comes from, right?
Yeah, I mean, standards and protocols, I think those are, unless somebody standardizes on them, then, they become useless, right? So this is really good that folks are adopting them.
Do you remember in engineering school, NIST, the National Institute of Standards or Standardization? And that's where ISO protocols come in. So, it has all those vibes. It's just good. Standardization is good.
Yeah, I mean, they made it, they put it open source. The big things is that OpenAI said, hey, yeah, we're going to support MCP, which everybody's like, okay, that's great. And then Google turned around and said, we're going to support MCP as part of our kind of frameworks and everything.
Google, Microsoft, pretty much everybody around the block, companies like Block, Apollo, Replit, Totem, they all are adding to support question is, has Element added? Where are we at with this, man?
We're not there yet. We will, but we're not there.
Are we thinking about it?
Yeah, would be leveraging it for bringing data in from different systems. So as we give our AI agents plugins or capabilities to, like, that's MCP protocol is the way that we would bring those in. But yeah.
All right, super exciting. It's from an engineering evolution and technical evolution is one of those things that standardization is good. It should allow speed. But from a consumer point of view, what do I care? How do I feel that, oh, great, AI engineers are now having an easier time developing? Fantastic. Why should I care? Let's start talking about how does it translate to us and also the higher education space.
So why should you care? There's a lot of folks who listen to this podcast who can be very geeky and understand and talk about AI and are building it, and then folks who are just kind of chumming in and thinking about, like, well, how do I use new tools? So if you think about why should you care, is you're hearing it quite a bit out there, and from just understanding what it is and understanding how it works, like, you don't probably need to care how it works, but you need to understand what it is and how different providers are using it. But right now, if you think about in a high level, building an agent feels like building an IKEA furniture with like random screws missing, right? You have to like plug in things from random places. It's like in order to get data into your agent to do anything, you have to decide, okay, I'm going to use make.com, or I'm going to use Zapier, or I'm going to use N8N or whatever, and they may be exposing certain data points, and then you have to bring that data in. So every tool like needs some kind of bespoke connector, right? Think about custom integrations. Like, that's the way it feels like. You have to build a custom integration for every place that you need to bring data in to connect with your agent. Well, MCP really flips that around, and now you write one connector and any agent can use it. So a CRM comes in, HubSpot, Element, we write an MCP for Element, and now your chatbot can actually call into Element and say, hey, Element, what can you do? And Element says, I can do this, this, and this, and this. And by the way, here's how all these tools work. And I can give you this data, this data, this data. And then now the chatbot, that can be Claude or ChatGPT, can use Element without you having to build an API between Element and ChatGPT. And that can be ChatGPT that uses it. It can be Claude that uses it. It can be other agent platforms that can use Element in order to kind of provide that data. So write one connector and any agent can use it. That's kind of the reason why I should care.
It decouples the logic as we know it, right? So in logic and interface, in other words, what we're able to attain here is that a developer can plug in Claude into an existing tool chain, right, without altering the tools, right? Into your IKEA analogy, one of the important things, if you put together several pieces of furniture, you know what you end up with? Several Allen keys and all these leftovers that remain in unused, that were used for the job. Very similar, the cleanup crew of I've gone through the customization is significant, right? So there's also another analogy there. Hey, Ardis, in our notes, there's this really interesting thing that it kills the M by N headache on every model, every time. What do we mean with the M by N model? I'm sorry, the M by N headache.
So when you think about, like, you have a connector from one to one, so you have a specific connector. Well, now if another tool needs to connect to that same endpoint or that same tool, you have to build another connector. So if you have 10 chatbots that need to connect to Element, you're building 10 unique connections there. But then that's the multiplication. So if you now add another data source, right, exactly. So if you have 10 agents, they need to connect to 2 different data sources. So it's 10 times 2, now it's 20, right? 20 different connections between them. So that's kind of the multiplication effect. So you need to build these custom things.
So, and this is time to value and obviously scalability. What do we think about model performance, though? That there's talks about getting better and reducing hallucinations. What can we say about that?
Yeah, this is really interesting because what we talk about as part of our agent series is the way that you reduce hallucinations is on grounding data on not just on questions, but also giving these agents tools. So those tools are specific to certain capabilities. So when you say, like, an LLM doesn't do math, for example, very well, so you hand that off to a Python interpreter, and that's a tool. So now you can say, you can kind of talk about many different tools that an LLM has access to for conversions, for think about, for a lot of different things, right? And the hallucinations come in when the AI or the model is trying to, like, it has to make up something, it has to give you a response, but it will never know, like, what the real, data, like what the stock market is right now for Apple, let's say. It doesn't have a tool, it doesn't have that data, so it's just going to make it up when you ask it that question. But now if you give it tools, it actually reduces the hallucinations because it thinks and reasons. It's like, oh, I can use this tool to go get that data right now and bring it in and then give you that, rather than, the LLMs actually making stuff up because they always have to return something to you, right?
Correct. So in other words, reducing hallucination is a function of good grounding, which represents solid data. And what we know that MCP does, it just basically standardizes the way the data is provided, and it's super exciting. All right, where do we go from here? We spoke about how this is grabbing momentum. It was a drop from late 2024, but it's really been in the past month that we see incredible backing from the community, right? And this is where us think it's important to have the conversation. So from OpenAI, we mentioned it, Google, HubSpot, LangChain, many others, and very, very soon, the one and only Element 451, right? Yeah, I'm manifesting here.
You're manifesting it? Yes, that's right. I think it's not vaporware, right? So like I said, OpenAI has backed this, and they're using it into their agent SDK that they have out there. So they're using MCP to do that data and the context. Google Gemini uses it, and they're baking it in as part of their platform. Actually, just today, and I saw HubSpot actually has their beta MCP server. So we use HubSpot for like our work here as a CRM, as a business CRM for sales and for kind of customer support. But this is something that's interesting that I'll definitely play around with. So we can now bring in some of that data directly into Claude, and we can ask questions for that. But also, there's a lot of other tools that have implemented kind of MCP servers. You probably will find it for Slack. You're going to find it for Teams. You're going to find it for a lot of different tools out there.
Ardis, can you talk about of the incumbent technology for this before we go into applications? So is this displacing the OpenAI API service, which requires all these customizations, or is not displacing anything? As this becomes more mainstream, what is this being removed, or nothing? It's just because everything is middleware and those Frankensteins are local.
I don't think this removes anything. It just makes it possible for agents to have this repositories without hard coding those connections. So it doesn't necessarily remove anything. You still have to use those external systems APIs in order to reach and get data from them. But now this is a layer on top of those data sources, right? So an MCP server is actually a layer on top of a data source or a system of record, where it can be a database, for example. So the MCP server says, hey, here is all, I'm going to give you five different tools. And one of them is, get the count of whatever, how many records there are. And underneath there, it's implementing that. But when I plug into that server, the manifest is available. So it tells me what's available, what those tools are. And that's the benefit here. That's how you plug it into these LLMs, and that's the benefit. Whereas traditional APIs, you have to implement them explicitly you have to plug them in. You have to know exactly what the API is based on the documentation. and then you have to hard code it into your code, and then you say, okay, call this API and call this and call that, and here's I'm going to pass data back and forth. Whereas with MCP is a little different. That's a higher level, abstraction that is all about discoverability, right? And these agents need to discover the world around them without actually having to be hard coded in. And this is why this becomes really, really powerful, is because of the discoverability component of it. The discoverability is really important. There have been other protocols in the past that kind of push the discoverability, but this is specifically built for agents and the world of agents and LLMs.
Yeah. Ardis, why don't we shift to a bit of use cases? I'll go rapid fire, and then you can comment and build as we need it. But I think as we think about these examples, today's world, it's multiple systems, multiple tools, and kind of glued together with a duct tape Frankenstein approach. But now with an MCP, a higher education enterprise like the ones that we work with, you could have an LMS feed scores that an advisor's notes, financial aid, flags, multiple things like that, powered by an AI tutor, would action without the need to go into a source like a CIS, right? And all that type of work is happening today with a ton of patches. In sales, we already gave the example of HubSpot. Today, us and many others need to do all this data enrichment so we can come and do follow-up emails. With MCP, we can ask an agent, hey, draft follow-up for everybody who basically ghosted me last week with phone calls, right? And it pings straight into HubSpot through MCP, and then all these sequences are nurtured. Development ops in, product teams. You let an AI monitor log in, kind of monitor logs, pages in Slack, fires out Jira tickets, and all of a sudden all these tools are able to do the project management, the communication, and the health monitor. Or simple model pools like in product analytics. Pull this data file, think about churn data, drop the model, about simple NPS, compute detractors and whatnot, and then write me the report. And all of a sudden what is happening is Snowflake with the data, Airtable, maybe with the model, or vice versa, the data in Airtable, the model in Snowflake, and Google Slides as a reporting. And that is all kind of Lego bricks as opposed to, a house of cards, right? So through these examples, the story is one spec, many tools coming in, and then MCP as that unifying glue. Yeah?
That's a lot of examples. I feel we can go on and explain like how this can benefit different areas, but the most exciting thing for me is that it's a discoverability component of it, and how these agents are now going to be interacting with each other and these different data sources as part of that. Obviously, it goes without saying that there's not a lot of gotchas around this, right? This is not, obviously you have to convince product teams to say, okay, you now have to implement this as part of your strategy. Right. Sometimes those product teams are going to be like, well, I can just use an API. It's a lot easier, and so on and so forth. So it will take a while for this to become important, but just understand that, as the consumer or the end user, your benefit today is that you can look for different services and bring them in. But some of the gotchas are everybody has to adopt it. So like I said, some are not going to adopt it. So gotchas are standards. They only win if there is kind of these vendors stick with them. And it seems like we're getting more and more support every single day. So Not really a gotcha, but there might be another protocol who wins and comes back and says, okay, this is even better. We don't know that. So
which is common in history, right? One standard being deprecated on lieu of another standard, right? But is the world of standardization that I think it's important here. So AKA your first output string on any programming language that you've done, right?
That's right.
That's how we all learn C++, Pascal, Java, whatever was your programming language back in the day, right?
Exactly. So today, if I were to say, hey, JC, like even as a technical person, I'm like, okay, like you can now plug MCP now to your Anthropic or to your Claude. And you're like, well, how the hell do I do that? Like, where do I go? So this is like, you have to download a server and put it on your local machine and run it. And then you can go from there. But it's becoming easier, and a lot of development is happening. So you can now connect to, let's say Zapier has introduced MCPs. So now you can go to Zapier, you can build your Zaps and then expose them as MCP, and then you can put that URL into your agent, and then boom, you have the hello world. So I think that's perhaps the first, example of that. But the momentum is real, and the big players are on board for this for sure.
I'm just thinking of college course like in 1995. A whole class, not a whole class, of several lectures on RS-232 and how to start basically writing on the pins, right, in the configuration if you needed to send a prompt to a dot matrix type of protocol or machine, how to use the protocol. And that's what you're talking about. I had to take lectures just to basically understand how you ping and basically activate that part of that port. And this is a 1960s, if I remember correctly, protocol. So that's what we're talking about. And the friction to go to time to value is being removed. Ton of Medium, by the way, there's a lot of Medium articles on how to configure MCP. So that's probably what will leave people if configuration is an issue. Another gotcha that you need to bring up?
No, I think we're kind of good on the gotchas. I think we want to kind of be a little bit more practical, or kind of call to actions as a consumer, as somebody who's buying AI or somebody who's looking into this stuff. You can certainly go out there and experiment and find some MCP servers that you can plug into kind of Claude desktop. But if you're kind of building AI products, I highly recommend to write the MCP server for your app now, right? And then I'll push our team to kind of do that, because it's something that we need to expose and open up that ecosystem.
I was just gonna say, here's probably the litmus test, right? We would recommend everybody to come and ask your AI vendors, hey, do you speak MCP, right? And the answer should be yes or no, and the why, right? And that's just a full understanding that any AI provider, it's thinking of the cutting edge of how this technology is emerging, right? Because we know that many of our AI peers are full of aspirations, to say the least, and many of us who are really building through AI, we keep up with it, right? And that's a really good litmus test. Do you speak MCP to signal a vendor's truly ability to stay with, I wouldn't say the cutting edge, but where the trend is going in terms of visibility, adaptability, as it relates to agents, right?
It's not really a trend. Like, this reminds me of when you say, does it integrate with X, or do you have an integration? And it's like, of course we integrate with X or Y. It's like, just use our export, our flat file, and it's like, well, wait a minute, like that's not really an integration. This is getting data in and out, and you have to build, the stuff in between. So it's like saying, do you have an API nowadays, or do you have an integration? So think about that. And now we've evolved to, do you speak MCP? Do you have an MCP server that I can connect my chatbot or my AI agents to, right? So that becomes really, really powerful. And that's the new question that you start asking platforms, rather than, do you have an API, or do you integrate with this? It's like, think about it. It's like, if you're not speaking MCP in a few months or maybe in the next year in terms of products, it's like shipping like a phone without a Bluetooth nowadays, right? Bluetooth is the standard for connectivity with everything. You just can't have that. You can't have a phone, or you can't have a device now without Bluetooth.
So I would reframe as the litmus test of, do you speak MCP is a signal of a capability as opposed to a trend. And vendors having this capability, it's, in our opinion, a must in this current ecosystem of AI. Well, this was short. Should we just keep on staying? Like, what's happening, Ardis? We're under 45 minutes. What are our listeners going to do?
No, this is a quick one. So MCP might feel very technical, but its implications are architectural, right? By introducing this shared structure for model context, Anthropic has really kind of paved the way for a more open, modular, and scalable AI systems. And by everybody adopting them, that's what we get, right? This network effect. If agents are really going to work across platforms, they'll need to speak a common language, and MCP might just be the one that they speak. We don't know, but we're hoping that we standardize pretty soon.
Well, I think that's a wrap on Generation AI. Thanks, Ardis, for always bringing the nerd and educating our friends. Subscribe, please share, and let us know which workflows you will unplug first once MCP goes mainstream, or let us know when is the first time you ask someone, do you speak MCP? Ardis?
Till next time, everybody. Generation AI is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you're going to like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing weekly, and we've got a wide range of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform that's helping institutions all over the country create meaningful, personalized, and engaging connections with their prospects and students. Learn more at element451.com.